Greetings, dear viewers, and welcome to HouseLux Estate, your reliable source of economic insights. We've journeyed through numerous economic landscapes together, exploring the highs of prosperous economies and the lows of financial crises. We've dissected complex economic theories and unraveled the mysteries behind currency fluctuations. As we continue this enlightening journey, we turn our focus to a darker side of economics. In today's discussion, we will delve into the pervasive issue of government corruption and its disastrous effects on an economy. Before we proceed, it's crucial to understand what we mean by government corruption. In essence, government corruption is the misuse of public power for private gain. This can take many forms, including bribery, embezzlement, nepotism, and fraud. But it's not just about individuals lining their pockets. Corruption can also involve bending the rules to favor certain groups or companies, leading to a distorted and inherently unfair economic landscape. The consequences are far-reaching, from stunted economic growth and weakened institutions to deep-seated social inequality. It's a cycle that, once set in motion, can be exceedingly difficult to break. And the cost? It's not just measured in dollars and cents, but in lost opportunities, dashed hopes, and in some cases, even lives. With this understanding, let's examine some real-world examples of economies that have suffered due to government corruption. The first case we will examine is Zimbabwe, once considered the breadbasket of Africa. At the dawn of independence in the early 80s, Zimbabwe was a land of promise. Its fertile soil yielded bountiful harvests, and its robust industries made it a beacon of economic prosperity in southern Africa. But over the ensuing decades, a different narrative emerged. This was a tale of economic downfall, characterized by hyperinflation, unemployment, and poverty. And at the heart of this downfall was corruption. Corruption in Zimbabwe was not an overnight occurrence. It crept in slowly, insidiously, eroding the pillars of the economy. It began with the misappropriation of funds, with public money finding its way into private pockets. Infrastructure development stalled, public services deteriorated, and the economy began to wobble. Then came the land redistribution program. On the surface, it was a noble venture aimed at redressing historical injustices. But in reality, it was marred by corruption and nepotism. The fertile lands didn't go to the landless peasants. Instead, they ended up with the political elite. This disrupted agricultural production, leading to food shortages and skyrocketing prices. Hyperinflation set in when the government started printing money to pay its debts. At its peak, prices were doubling every 24 hours. The local currency became worthless, savings evaporated, and the economy hit rock bottom. Corruption also crippled Zimbabwe's industries. Crony capitalism flourished as the government awarded contracts and licenses to friends and family. Foreign investors, wary of the lack of transparency and accountability, shied away. The industries, deprived of much-needed capital, stagnated. Unemployment soared as businesses closed down. The healthcare and education sectors, starved of resources due to corruption, collapsed. Poverty levels rose and the standard of living plummeted. Today, despite its vast natural resources, Zimbabwe is one of the poorest countries in the world. As we can see, unchecked corruption can lead an economy from prosperity to hardship in a few short decades. The story of Zimbabwe is a stark reminder of the devastating effects of corruption on an economy. It shows that without good governance, no amount of natural resources can guarantee economic prosperity. Our next case study brings us to South America, to the oil-rich nation of Venezuela. Venezuela, home to the largest proven oil reserves in the world, was once a shining beacon of prosperity in South America. But today, it stands as an example of how corruption can bring a thriving economy to its knees. In the past couple of decades, Venezuela's government corruption has taken a toll on its oil sector, the backbone of the nation's economy. The situation worsened when the government started to use the oil revenues as a personal piggy bank, diverting funds meant for infrastructure development and maintenance into their own pockets. As oil prices plummeted globally, the government's mismanagement and corruption left the country ill-prepared to cope, leading to a devastating economic collapse. The government's corruption didn't stop at the oil sector. It permeated every level of the economy, creating a climate of uncertainty and instability that scared away foreign investors and led to capital flight. Businesses shut down, unable to navigate the murky waters of a corrupt system. Unemployment soared and inflation skyrocketed, reaching unprecedented levels. The corruption also led to a severe shortage of basic goods and services. Supermarket shelves lay bare, hospitals lacked essential medicines, and power outages became a common occurrence. The government's response? More corruption. Instead of addressing the root causes, officials engaged in black market activities, further exacerbating the crisis. The human cost of this economic collapse has been staggering. Millions of Venezuelans have been forced to flee their homes in search of better opportunities elsewhere. Those who remain struggle daily to meet their basic needs in a country where the average monthly wage is barely enough to buy a dozen eggs. Venezuela's story serves as a stark reminder of how corruption can squander a nation's wealth and plunge its people into poverty. The nation's descent from prosperity to penury is a cautionary tale for other countries, a vivid illustration of the devastating effects that corruption can have on an economy. From these case studies, we can identify some common ways that corruption damages an economy. Firstly, corruption discourages both domestic and foreign investment. Investors require a level of predictability and transparency in order to make informed decisions. When corruption becomes the norm, it introduces an element of unpredictability that investors tend to avoid. This lack of investment can stagnate an economy, halting growth and development. Secondly, corruption exacerbates income inequality. When public funds are misappropriated for personal gain, it means less money is available for public services such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure. This tends to hit the most vulnerable in society the hardest, widening the gap between the rich and the poor. Over time, this can lead to social unrest and instability, further damaging the economy. Next, corruption undermines public trust in government and institutions. When people perceive that their leaders are corrupt, it erodes their faith in the system. This can lead to a lack of engagement, with citizens less likely to pay taxes or participate in civic activities. This disengagement can further weaken the economy as the government lacks the resources it needs to function effectively. Additionally, corruption can lead to a misallocation of resources. In a corrupt system, resources tend to flow towards those with power and influence, rather than where they are most needed. This can lead to inefficient and wasteful spending, preventing the economy from reaching its full potential. Lastly, corruption can damage a country's international reputation. This can lead to reduced foreign aid, trade sanctions, and other negative consequences that can further harm the economy. All of these factors create a vicious cycle. Corruption leads to economic problems, which in turn make corruption more likely, as people become desperate and standards of governance decline. The cost of corruption is clear. It harms economies and leaves ordinary citizens to bear the burden. As we've seen, the effects of corruption are wide-ranging and deeply damaging, affecting not just the economy, but society as a whole. As we conclude, it's important to remember that corruption isn't an insurmountable problem. It's a complex issue, yes, but not one beyond our capacity to tackle. We've seen its devastating effects on economies like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, but it's time now to shift our focus to solutions, to the measures that can be taken to combat corruption and restore economic stability. Firstly, transparency. It's the enemy of corruption. The more transparent a government, the less room there is for illicit activities to thrive. Through transparent governance, we can ensure that every penny of public funds is accounted for, every contract awarded with integrity, every policy decision made in the best interest of the people. Next, let's talk about accountability. It's the backbone of any functioning democracy. Without it, a government can act with impunity. But with strong institutions and a robust legal framework, we can hold those in power accountable for their actions. We can ensure that no one is above the law, and that those who exploit their positions for personal gain face the consequences. But transparency and accountability aren't enough on their own. They need to be supplemented with civic participation. That's right, the public has a crucial role to play in the fight against corruption. It's the people who can demand transparency, who can hold their leaders accountable, who can vote out a corrupt government and vote in one that is committed to clean governance. In the end, corruption is a societal issue, and it requires a societal response. It's not just about laws and policies, it's about people. It's about creating a culture of integrity, a culture where corruption is not tolerated, where honesty and fairness are valued above all else. So what can you do? Stay informed, ask questions, demand answers, use your voice and your vote. And remember, every small action counts. Every demand for transparency, every call for accountability, every vote cast against corruption, it all adds up. It all contributes to the fight against corruption and for a better, more equitable economy. Thank you for joining us today on House Lux Estate. If you found this video informative, please subscribe and share it with others. Together, we can spread awareness and help combat corruption.